Hello, everyone, and welcome to day 3 of Entrepreneur Week, hosted by the Foundation for Economic Education. As Michelle mentioned, I'm Carrie McDonald, FEE's Senior Education Fellow, and I'm delighted to be joined by such an incredible panel of presenters today to spend about the next 90 minutes talking about how to turn your passions into profits. I will introduce our speakers in just a moment, but wanted to first recap this series. It began on Monday with a panel hosted by FEE's Director of Entrepreneurial Education, TK Coleman, sharing ideas on how teenagers and young adults can get inspired to become entrepreneurs. And then yesterday, FEE's Creative Director, Sean Malone, led a panel on how to get creative and the intersection of entrepreneurship and creative talent. So Monday was Get Inspired, Tuesday was Get Creative, and now today's is Get Paid. How can you turn your emerging or sustained interests and passions into a profitable business? Our panel of 2 young entrepreneurs and 2 longtime investors and mentors to entrepreneurs has some great ideas to share with you today, and I think it's going to be a great program. Then tomorrow is the final day of FEE's Entrepreneur Week. The theme of that is Get Started. You can put all of the insights you've learned this week into practice with the final Get Started webinar tomorrow. That one is being offered in both English and in Spanish. So I would encourage you to go ahead and register for that session at fee.org if you haven't already. So now I have the great privilege of introducing our incredible panelists for this evening. After my first introductions, they'll each speak for about 10 minutes to share more about their individual backgrounds and experiences, and then we'll open it up to a dynamic question and answer session. So I hope you'll take a look now at the bottom of your screen where it says Q&A, and at any time throughout these initial presentations, please ask your questions. Then we'll be able to get to as many of them as possible during the Q&A period following these initial presentations. We'd also really love your feedback on this event. So later in the program, you will see a link to a post-program feedback form that we hope you'll take a couple of minutes to fill out. So now for our speakers. Our first speaker is Antonia Hellman. Antonia is the co-founder and co-CEO of Toucan. That's Toucan, toucan.events. Along with her brother, Ethan. She is a senior at Stanford University studying political science, economics, and management science and engineering. And prior to Toucan, Antonia's background was primarily in political campaigning and data science. She and Ethan launched Toucan as a virtual platform specifically designed for social events and gatherings, so quite a beneficial startup given the nature of the pandemic and all of these web events that we're all participating in. So event guests through Toucan move smoothly from conversation to conversation, keeping track of the friends and people what they want to meet, while also having a sense of what's going on around them. Toucan brings people and communities together in a natural, engaging, and fun way. We can't wait to hear more about Toucan. Welcome, Antonia. And our second speaker today will be Alec Rincavage. Alec has been an entrepreneur for much of his childhood and adolescence. He says that from the bedroom of his Northeast Pennsylvania home, he began his career as a freelance web developer building websites for Minecraft communities during its height within the gaming world. And then after the decline of those networks, he shifted his focus to network security. Alec calls himself a college opt-out following high school. He continues to run his cybersecurity startup called Cybiot, that's cybiot.com, driven to automate and replace network security engineers and equipment for small to medium organizations. Cybiot is a venture capital-backed startup with the 1517 fund that we'll hear more about from Danielle in just a minute, and that invests in young entrepreneurs and early stage companies. So welcome to Alec. We're so glad you're here with us as well. Our third speaker today is Danielle Strockman. She's the co-founder and general partner of 1517, a venture capital firm backing founders at the earliest stages of their careers and companies. She's worked with young entrepreneurs for about a decade. In 2010, during the founding of the Thiel Fellowship, Danielle joined to lead its design and operations. And then previous to her work with Peter Thiel, Danielle founded and directed Innovations Academy in San Diego, which was is a K-12 charter school serving 400 students with a focus on student-led project-based learning and other alternative programs. So welcome, Danielle. So thrilled that you're here with us to share your perspectives, and also really delighted that you passed along to me Antonia and Alex information so that we could get them to be here as well. And then finally, we're joined today by John Chisholm. John has 4 decades of experience as an entrepreneur, CEO, and investor. He founded and for 5 years served as chairman and CEO of Decisive Technology, which is now a part of Google, publisher of the first desktop and client service software for online surveys. Later, he founded and for 11 years served as chairman and CEO of CustomerSat, now a part of Confirmit, which is a leading provider of enterprise feedback management systems. And today, John heads John Chisholm Ventures, which is a San Francisco-based entrepreneurship and investment firm. John is a member of the board of trustees of MIT and past president and chair of the Worldwide MIT Alumni Association. He holds bachelor's and master's degrees in electrical engineering and computer science from MIT and an MBA from Harvard Business School. John writes and speaks frequently on how to cultivate and grow Silicon Valleys around the world and on what forms of regulation foster versus stifle entrepreneurship, innovation, and economic growth. John is the author of the book that I think is completely relevant for our discussion tonight. It's called Unleash Your Inner Company, Using Passion and Perseverance to Build Your Ideal Business. That's certainly going to be helpful for us here. Thank you so much for being here, John.
Great to be here. Carrie, thank you for having me.
And now let's begin with Antonia. We'll hear from Antonia, then Alex, then Danielle, and finally John. But let's begin with Antonia and your work with Toucan. I know we're all very eager to hear about your journey as a young entrepreneur.
Sure, and thank you, Carrie, for having me, and thank you all to everybody who is attending this event. My name is Antonia Hellman, and like Carrie mentioned, I am the co-founder and co-CEO of Toucan, which is a company that I started during quarantine with my brother and a couple of our other co-founders who came together in a kind of interesting way that I will touch on in a little bit. So just a brief overview of what Toucan is. Toucan is a platform that is designed really to allow people to have more human interactions at their virtual events. So this started after my brother, who is a sophomore at Stanford, and I got sent home from school. And we realized that the default video conferencing tools were simply not good enough to keep communities together. We were not only physically isolated from all of our friends, but that connection wasn't facilitated at all by these existing tools. The default was to say, okay, let's all hop on a Zoom call. And after we had a couple events where 20, 30 people were all together in their little squares, and they all turned off their microphones, all turned off their cameras, and the conversation just died, we realized that we needed a different solution that actually allowed people to have fun interactions virtually. That way we could keep those communities together. And so we sat down at our kitchen table together and we talked through why these platforms weren't serving our needs. And we realized that the question was about what makes a group. And as elementary as it sounds, no matter how large a group is, it's fundamentally made up of many smaller groups. And that's really the foundation of Toucan as a platform where people can gather together in one space virtually, but they're not forced to talk to everybody all at once. You can move smoothly from group to group, talk with the people you want, and really take control over your own social experience. That's really what makes going to a party or a cocktail event or a networking event or even a conference so fun, is you get to meet interesting people and make those connections. So it's really important for me to stress that this whole experience wouldn't have been possible without my brother. He and I sat down and we've been dreaming up ideas as to how to solve people's problems for so many years, ever since we were really little. And that's because we grew up in a very entrepreneurial family. So my father is a serial entrepreneur. So he really raised me, my brother, and my little sister to ask ourselves questions and to believe that we could create the answers to those questions in really creative and innovative ways. So this manifested itself in a 4th grade lucky friendship bracelet venture that I created as a 10-year-old that won an award at my school for most creative marketing because it featured President Barack Obama, which in hindsight was probably not like totally okay, but he really helped me win that award, and I was 10, so it's not a big deal. But the bottom line is I was really encouraged from a young age to think outside the box and believe that I could make other people's lives better. And that's followed me through the years as well, into college. So as Carrie mentioned, I am a political science and economics major at Stanford. And that's not necessarily the majors that you may hear about from people who are pursuing careers in business, but I actually see that there is a great deal of overlap between what I do as CEO and co-founder of Toucan and also my studies, specifically in politics. But what I really want to focus on is a project that I started when I was a sophomore in college, which is called Stanford Votes. And Stanford Votes was the direct response of the student body to the dismal voter turnout numbers among Stanford students in the 2016 and 2014 elections. And like fewer than 1 in 5 students voted in the 2014 election. And as the 2018 election came around, we really wanted to boost those numbers. And I kind of fell into this position a little bit by accident, but I was told, hey, this is a problem. And here are some resources. Here are a couple of advisors. And here is a co-director. Figure it out. We want to increase these turnout numbers. And so over the summer, my co-director and I, we got together. We thought of creative solutions that were not at all feasible, but then we worked backwards and we said, how can we make something like what we're talking about work? And lo and behold, by the 2018 election, we increased voter registration and turnout by over 150% on campus. And Stanford Votes to this day has carried on and been extremely successful. I learned a lot from that experience. And even though it isn't necessarily me building my own company, it taught me a lot of the skills that were necessary for me to really go after building Toucan, in full force. It taught me the importance of organizational skills. It taught me the importance of a really strong team. And it taught me the importance of just running with your creativity. And so just to conclude, I'd really like to leave, or I guess I'm starting, but I'd really like to open this with a few words of advice from somebody who is just starting out on her entrepreneurial journey. The first really is about the team. your team is everything. You're working with these people 24/7. So it's really, really important that you establish some mutual trust and understanding among all of the members of that team. And there also needs to be a fun side. If there's all work and no play, then it's really just a slog, and you're going to start to get aggravated with what you're doing. So please build some fun into your work. Then another piece of advice is it's really important to understand that you're going to be learning on the job. And that's what I do every single day. Over the past 6 months running my own company, I've learned more than I have in years in college. And that's not to say that you shouldn't go to college. I've had a great experience in college. But it is to say that learning by doing should not be underestimated or undervalued. Next, fundraising. Fundraising takes time, and it's hard. You're going to talk to tons of investors who, and some of them won't totally understand your product like you want them to, but that's normal, and you need to keep a level head and just move on. Trust that what you're doing is really valuable. Then next, please, it's okay to not know things. People respect you if you admit what you don't know. I really certainly don't know a lot of things. I don't know most things. But like I've said, over the past 6 months, I've grown a lot as an entrepreneur. I've grown a lot as a leader. And I continue to grow every single day. And I'm really proud of that. So if there's anything that I'd like to get out of this experience, starting and running my own company over the next few years, I really just want to see myself and also my brother and my co-founders flourish as leaders. And lastly, enjoy what you do, because you're going to be sticking with this project for a really long time. It's going to be on your mind every second of the day. And in order to really have fun, in order to create a really good product, a really good company, you have to make sure that that's something that you love doing and that you find interesting. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you so much, Antonia. It's just fascinating. We have lots of questions coming, so please be sure again to look to the bottom of your screen where it says Q&A, and be sure to submit questions as the presenters keep talking. Antonia, I do want to go on to Alec in just a moment, but we did have some questions directly related to you and Toucan, so I thought I might just ask one follow-up. It does seem
Sure.
like Toucan, as you mentioned, I think even before we went live, really began as a result of the pandemic. The Wall Street Journal recently had an analysis finding a hopeful sign, I suppose, if anything good could come out of this, that Americans are starting new businesses at the fastest rate in more than a decade during the pandemic. Certainly Toucan would be in that category. But one of the questions from one of our viewers is, what is your plan post-pandemic with Toucan?
That's a really great question, and thank you for asking. I am proof that there has been a trend for a long time that is bringing us more towards socializing virtually. I was one of the first kids to get out there and play video games with strangers, which kind of gave my parents a heart attack. But now it's okay, and it's a lot safer than with IM and direct messaging. That was a huge thing. And now we have social media. What we are seeing, even before the pandemic, is that people were starting to work a lot more remotely. These offices were getting split up, and people were getting rid of their leases on their office space. So what we are really focused on is making sure that people have a way of connecting post-pandemic as well with the people that they work with. And so we've really been working together at this point with a lot of small and medium-sized businesses to help them cultivate this office environment, even if they may be all distributed. And trust me, Toucan is an example of that. My co-founders, we are all distributed across the world. One is in the Bay Area, I'm in New York, one's in Montreal, Canada, and then one is in Italy. And we work together every single day. And we socialize over Toucan, our entire team. And it brings us together. So we really want to give that joy and that human interaction to other businesses around the world.
Wonderful. Thank you again, Antonia. I'm sure we'll hear more from you in the questions and answers. They're really flowing in now, so I appreciate everyone asking questions. So we'll move on to Alec. I think your story is really interesting, Alec, because I'm sure there's a lot of kids who do enjoy playing Minecraft in their bedrooms, and you are the example of how you can turn video game playing into a network security business that's venture capital backed. It's sort of this dream, I'm sure, of a lot of young people today. So I'd love to hear more about your story as well as Cybiot.
Thank you so much, Carrie. Today's topic is how do you turn your passions into profits? And I'm happy to be here because I think discovering my passions is actually what took me into business. And so I'm the founder and CEO at Cybiot. We're out in the middle of nowhere of Pennsylvania, outside of any major city. But I say our closest city is Philadelphia. So which is proof that you can build what you want to build anywhere you are in the world, especially in today's day and age. But we take network security tools and we build them for small to medium businesses. We really think that these companies that are out there are really building to protect these banks and healthcare networks, but the small and medium-sized businesses out there, the businesses that are in the backyard of our communities are being left behind. And so that was all rooted from just an interest in technology. And so I was the eBay and yard sale entrepreneur. I was the type of kid who around middle school, I would start taking computers, piecing them apart, putting the parts online, selling them for a profit. My parents would buy me toys as a young kid. If they happened to make it through the year without me breaking them apart and looking for how they work and tinkering with them, I would then go and sell them at the yard sale. And it was something about those experiences that I think really gave me my entrepreneurial interest. I mean, if anybody's been to a yard sale, it's notorious for you put $1 on the price tag, somebody is bound to try to get it for like 50 cents. And so something about that human interaction, that negotiation that I just really loved to do on top of, making money on your own time and at your own will without having to answer to anybody else. But really my true passion was with technology. And I was a video gamer from my middle school to high school years and basically took that interest and just kept steamrolling with it. And so while I was playing Minecraft at the time, which was the hottest game at the time, I was trying to figure out how people are building these servers and building these communities. And from there, I got interested into websites, and then from websites learned how to design and to build websites, all from behind my computer without anybody knowing who I was, how old I was, and all the money being sent to my parents' PayPal account. And then it was really at that point where I was interested in computers overall. And I was just the guy that friends of family and teachers and anyone in the community just knew to bring computers to in the event that they needed to be fixed. And one of the things that I found, and we're talking, this has been a 5-year journey. I started the company that I run today 5 years ago, but it was many pivots over time. It was many different ideas. And it really started at the end of my 8th grade year, going into 9th grade, going into high school, when these computers I was fixing, they all had the same issues. It was always viruses. It was always things needed to be sped up. The computers needed to be optimized. And I was doing the same tasks over and over again for each computer. And I wanted to build a tool that I could just automate this process. So it didn't matter if I had 10 computers to work on or one, I wasn't spending time going through the list of tools to make these fixes. And so I actually built that product. And that was my first company at the end of my 8th grade year, going into my 9th grade year. And my first investor was actually my 9th grade homeroom teacher. From there, I just got bit by the bug, I guess you can say. And that idea just kept on sprouting. And as one of the things that I learned was, as you grow as an entrepreneur, your product is bound to grow. And so as I was learning more about network security, because I was focused on solving ransomware and solving these virus attacks, I was learning what really was causing cybersecurity companies to not develop the best products on the market. At the time, antivirus wasn't working to the point where we are today, where many people don't even have antivirus programs on their computers. They use whatever comes built into the PC. And so over the course of 5 years and talking to people and learning more, I was actually able to continue pivoting on the idea, continue changing my mind. And I think that was really powerful. And I think one of the greatest takeaways with being an entrepreneur is in order to be a mature thinker, you have to be able to change your mind. You have to be able to adapt. You have to be able to admit what you don't know. To continue that process till today, where I build enterprise security solutions that are otherwise designed for really big corporations and deliver them to small to medium-sized businesses. I was never a corporate cybersecurity expert. Just by my age alone, I never had the opportunity of sitting in the boardroom of a large bank or a large healthcare network and talking about cybersecurity threats. So you have to admit where your faults are, where you just don't have a knowledge base, and you have to surround yourself with people who are smarter than you and people who are, I think the line goes, you have to stand on the shoulders of giants. And so I really looked for advisors and mentors who could give me this knowledge to fill these gaps, because just because you don't know something doesn't mean you can't go for it. Being an entrepreneur is your ability to overcome adversity, your ability to just figure things out when times get tough. And that's why entrepreneurship is one of the most multidisciplined trades I think there is. It really applies anywhere. And you heard, as Antonia was talking about how she has a political science degree, I actually ran for office, and I'm a councilman in my hometown. And it just, I think from entrepreneurship, I was able to get my public speaking skills. I was able to become a better, more well-rounded person and somebody who can be a better member to my community. And I attribute all that to entrepreneurship. And on top of that, I get to work every day for myself. And I get to, it's really awesome having employees and having investors and having the opportunities to speak at conferences like this. But it is a long process, and it's something that if you really stick to, I think it can really truly help you develop as a human, especially when you're so young and things are growing basically as you're growing. My earliest investors will say they didn't invest in a company or a product, they invested in me.
Alec, that's so great. Thank you for sharing. And I think what's interesting, Alec is 19. You said you're a college opt-out. You decided not to go to college after high school because you're having so much success with Cybiot and these entrepreneurial endeavors and some of your public service. One question we got from the audience is, was there anything from high school that has impacted what you do today? And if so, how?
That's a really tough one off the cuff. Impacted me from high school. I think those are very big developmental years. So when I started my venture in my 8th grade, going into 9th grade year, there was a lot of me in the news, and that kind of carried with me throughout my high school years. And there's a lot of people that think a lot of kids who get into entrepreneurship might think, and I hate saying kids, but a lot of us who get into entrepreneurship might think that, maybe we don't need high school. They're not teaching us what we need. But I stuck it through, and I kept going. And I think those years were really developed. I developed as a human, having that social interaction. But I think it was the people I met. And so along the way, being able to have like my 9th grade homeroom teacher who didn't even really know me become an investor and be with me on this endeavor from the very beginning is so powerful. And I think it speaks volumes. And so just having those opportunities at our high school, we had a Future Business Leaders of America club. So going to different business conferences where I actually met the individual who would become a venture capitalist who would invest in my company. And so if I was never at that FBLA conference in Hershey, Pennsylvania, when I was a sophomore, I would have never met the individual by the name of Zach Slayback, who was a guest speaker at an event similar to this, who I went up to at the end of the event. And he gave me his contact information. And 3 years later, him and his firm would be investing in my company. And together, him and I were both nobodies essentially, and now he's provided so much for where I'm at today.
Wonderful. Thanks, Alex. Excuse me. So Danielle, you have long worked with these young entrepreneurs like Antonia and Alec, and 1517 is committed to investing in young people with compelling business ideas. Tell us more about your work and your advice for entrepreneurs who are just getting started.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for having me, Carrie. I have a lot to say, but start a little bit with the background and then go into some sort of words of wisdom. But yeah, I have worked with this demographic of founders, typically younger founders who are students or people who are opting out of college or people who are college students for about 10 years now. I was on the founding team of the Thiel Fellowship back in 2010. When the fellowship first launched, it was funded by Peter Thiel and still is funded by Peter Thiel. And the idea was that answering a question, really. And this question was, what would happen if we gave a $100,000 grant to young people who had something that they really wanted to do, a really big passion that they knew they could start executing on right now, instead of being told that they had to wait until they finished some other portion of their life, whether that was school or a first job or any number of things before they could get started. And when we started the program 10 years ago, it was not very typical for people to talk about different alternatives to going to higher ed. In fact, I would even call it sort of sacrilegious to talk about it. But I can say now, 10 years later, that it's a very normal conversation for families to have about what is the right path for their young person. So sometimes that right path is going to school. Sometimes that right path is taking a gap year or going into a boot camp program. Sometimes that right path is starting a company or forming a nonprofit or something a little bit different. So we got the pleasure of working with some extraordinary young people like Vitalik Buterin, who founded Ethereum, people like Ritesh Agarwal, who started Oyo Rooms, which is the second largest hotel chain in the world. He was 19 when we started working with him. People like Laura Deming, who started the Longevity Fund. She started that when she was 17 years old. It's a fund that helps to back longevity-based companies, so people who are doing research to help extend human health and lifespan. She actually was a researcher even as young as 14, working in different labs, and she decided that the place where she saw a problem to solve, which is something that as an entrepreneur, that's really your aim, is to solve a problem, was not that the research was hard to do, but that funding for the work was very hard to do. So she started a venture fund based on that. And then people like Dylan Field, who started Figma, which some people might be aware of. It's a design tool now. So we had the pleasure of working with these young people, helping them get something off the ground and giving them 2 years to really focus, give them $100,000 in funding and the support of mentors as well. From there, myself and my colleague decided to start 1517 Fund. We had seen some really amazing outcomes from the young people we worked with. And our thought was that 5 years in, so now this is 2015, what we said to our boss, Peter Thiel, was we think young entrepreneurship is trending and it's going to keep trending up and up and up, and that people are going to need more support. We don't see this as a fad where it's cool to do this now and it won't be later. And so we decided we think we could start a sort of Thiel Fellowship 2.0 by starting a venture capital fund that focuses primarily on founders who are first-time founders, who are younger founders, founders who often don't have a college degree and are just getting started very, very early in what they're doing. So we will back a team when they have some semblance of a product and they're going into a pilot with someone. We will actually start backing people earlier than that. Alec is part of our Invisible College program, where we'll write people a $50,000 check to get started very early to build that prototype out. We actually launched that program over the pandemic because we saw just this huge influx of young people reaching out to us saying, hey, I want to do something with my time. Maybe I don't want to go to Zoom school, or maybe I am doing Zoom school, but I have extra time now to do other things that I want. And so I want to try to start something. We also offer young people $1,000 grants to help them work on projects. And we really see those grants not as an investment in a company, but an investment in a person. And so it's about saying, hey, we want to give you this grant money to be able to get started on something that, who knows, maybe it'll become a company, maybe it won't. But what we do know is that it will be a learning opportunity both for that young entrepreneur and for us to learn about a technological space. And there's some sort of words of wisdom that I want to go through. There's a bunch of different things that I've learned over time. One is that I run into a lot of young people who have a big mission for what they want to do, and that's really important, that problem that you want to solve. But sometimes you ask someone, well, what are you going to do on Friday? How are you going to get started with this? And then that's where people sometimes get a bit flummoxed and don't know where to start. So I would say it's really important to start thinking about how do you get started, even just tiny, tiny little steps on where you want to go. Like if you want to develop an app or piece of software, then you're going to start needing to learn the skills for that. And every day, those things add up over time. And then you can be the person who builds what you want to build. I have a lot of young people who will come to me and say, hey, I want to build X, I want to build Y, I want to build Z. I had a young person who was out of the UK who wanted to build a piece of hardware. And he lived actually in a very remote area. And he said, how can I find someone to build this for me? And I talked to him and I said, listen, you're in a very remote area. He didn't have access to a lot of peers who would be able to start building hardware. But I said, you could start learning online and you could start building this out yourself. And that's what he did. And a couple of years later, he is very well developed as a builder and a maker now. And so one thing I would say is that start making now. Don't wait until later. Don't think that someone else is going to do that part of the work for you. Or if you have friends at school, you could bring them together and you can work on something together and bring your skill sets to make something bigger than any of you could do on your own. Another thing that I wanted to say was just, what can you do? I've been thinking about what can you do while you're in high school to really get started. One thing that I think helps is actually building your leadership ability as well, thinking about running clubs in school and really taking on those leadership positions, because that will help you to do better with what you do in any sort of business venture that you go forward with. I'm also a very big proponent of speech and debate if you have that available to you, because those skills will run throughout your whole life in terms of how do you present, how do you make an argument and a case for something, how do you logically think through something, how do you communicate? These are all very, very important skills. And then lastly, I really wanted to go over a few programs that I think can be beneficial to people who are listening. One of them is called NextGen. They are a community of young entrepreneurs who are in Gen Z and millennials as well. So check that out. Another is called Quarter Zero. That they focus exclusively on high school students. There's a group called the Knowledge Society that also focuses on high school students and helping them to build out projects and giving them a community of peers. And reach out to us at 1517 as well. We have grants, we have a community that we run, and we're here to support you along that journey.
Well, we've had a lot of questions here that I think it's useful that you shared some of these resources. Some of the people listening were wondering about how can they find mentors or where do they go for support. So I think it's great that you just shared those resources.
Yeah. I was going to say one more thing about mentors, actually, if I could.
Please.
I had that on my list of things to go over, and I forgot about it for a second. But yeah, on mentors, you're at a time in your life where you have something that you're able to leverage in an interesting way, and that is being young, being a youth. And it's hard to resist when someone young reaches out to you and says, hey, I really admire your work, or I'm really interested in learning more about these things. Can you help me with them? And we live in a very digital world now, and it's much easier to reach out to people. So if there are people that you would love to learn from or be able to, have as a mentor in some way, I would say, take the time in your teens and early 20s to reach out to those people. Because there's just something different about when a young person reaches out to you, you want to give back, you want to pay it forward. So use that to your advantage.
Other question for you, Danielle, before we head on to John and then open it up to many more of these questions. But there were some questions here, one from Heidi wondering, is funding available from 1517 for younger people, younger than Alec? I guess how young are you investing? And at what stage would you be looking at in terms of when someone should contact you? What should they have already prepared or thought about?
Yeah, so with 1517, there's lots of ways to engage with us. One is that we have a community that we run. We have a very active Facebook page, and so people will contact us and say, hey, I'm really interested in entrepreneurship and getting started here. And sometimes we'll say, hey, yeah, like let's talk and like let's bring you into our community of people so that you can get peer support and mentorship as well. With our grants, there's no age restriction on that. It tends to be people who are in their teens through early 20s. And that's just a personal $1,000 grant to the person, so there's no ownership in a company. When we do our invisible college check, we are looking to see if someone has sort of the technical chops to work on an R&D project. We don't expect them to have any sort of customers or anything like that, but what we want to see is that the business could be something that is commercializable in the future. And then lastly, we write a $250,000 check into companies where they usually have some semblance of a product and they're going into a pilot with a couple of customers. As far as age on all of this, you know, we've worked with people who are in their teens through their 20s. We have founders who are older as well, who also fit our thesis of not having a college degree. So it's not about age for us, it's really about stage. And for us, it's really about thinking about where does this person fit within that, you know, community through investment pipeline. We like to build relationships with people over time, and that's how we do it. So please definitely reach out.
Great. And if you can just say again, that was the Facebook group of the 1517. Is that a public group that folks can join?
It's not public. So yeah, so we talk to every single person in that group and make sure that, you know, we've had a conversation. We do. Right. So we do vet for that group, but people should contact us on our website and then we can take it from there.
Wonderful. Thank you, Danielle. John, we'll go to you now, our final speaker, and then open it up to the larger question and answer session. Like Danielle, you have worked with entrepreneurs for many years, and you've also been an entrepreneur and written an inspiring book about entrepreneurship. I wonder if you can tell us about the greatest challenge you faced in the 3 decades that you've been an entrepreneur.
Carrie, thanks so much. And I've been inspired by Antonia and Alec and Danielle, and it's wonderful to be here. I would have to say that the greatest challenge I've faced was during the dot-com bust of 2000 and 2001. Those nights in the first quarter in particular, I would often wake up in sweat-soaked sheets at 2 a.m, sticking to my skin. Our second round of financing, our Series B round, refused to close despite a flurry of meetings as we ran out of cash. Just to set the stage, for those of you who might not have even been there, the internet first became commercially available and productized in the 1990s. And during that time, billions of dollars was invested and overinvested in the internet. Companies like eBay, Amazon, Google, and PayPal were all founded during that time. Well, that huge overinvestment burst in 2000 and 2001, and that's known as the dot-com bust, and during which time tens of thousands of companies started going out of business left and right. Well, those nights in that first quarter of 2001, I would wake up and shower off the sweat and try to get back to sleep. When my management team and I finally realized that our Series B round was not going to close, we huddled to figure out what to do. First, we cut our own salaries, and then a few weeks later, those of all of our employees by 10%. I cut my own salary by 50%. Agonizing and debating over every individual, we laid off 40% of our workforce, 40% of the company I'd spent the last 4 years of my life building. When I assembled our remaining employees to explain to them that this was the only way we could stay afloat and stay together, I felt my composure collapsing, and I broke down sobbing in front of our employees. They stood there stunned, sympathetic, and embarrassed that their CEO was crying in front of them. That first quarter of 2001, our revenues fell by 20%. That's a lot for a software as a service recurring revenue business. To help us get through, one of our investors lent me $300,000. For the company, but not to the company, but to me to pass through to the company, meaning that I would be personally liable for repaying the loan. Later, I would repay that investor, to whom, despite the arrangement, I was deeply grateful, by mortgaging the townhouse that I lived in. The next quarter, our revenues fell again. This time we factored receivables. That is, we sold our future receivables for cash today at a 20% discount so that we could make payroll, an expensive maneuver that you don't want to do routinely. To save on rent, we moved to the less attractive second floor of our building and rented out the first floor, which was more attractive to another startup. That company quit paying us rent after about 90 days, came in late one weekend night, cleared out all their belongings, and disappeared without a trace. I reduced my salary to minimum wage. The nightmare would not end. Finally, we could see profitability ahead in the third quarter of 2001. And then, as you know, on September 11th, terrorists attacked the World Trade Center in New York City. The entire Northeast communications grid was down. It took an entire day just to confirm that all of our employees were still alive. Finally, the next day, I was able to announce all customer sat employees are safe. Even though we were in Silicon Valley, 3,000 miles away, every company, even in Silicon Valley, I know, had clients or customers or suppliers who lost family members or employees in the terrorist attacks. If the dot-com bust did not kill a company, almost certainly the terrorist attacks of September 11th did. Well, we did not make a profit or break even in that third quarter of 2001. We did break even in the fourth quarter. We didn't hire a single new employee for 18 months. The going kept tough for the next 2 to 3 years, but we made it through. And the company was acquired in the first quarter of 2008. Often I've wondered, why did customer sat survive when most other companies of our size and age failed? I absolutely don't think we were smarter than other management teams. We absolutely did not have more in the way of resources than other companies did. One of our clients, we only raised $2.94 million in our entire life. One of our clients was Webvan, who famously raised $75 million before their IPO, then several $100 million more in their IPO, and then declared bankruptcy 16 months after their IPO. So we certainly didn't have more in the way of resources. If I had to attribute it to just two factors, why we survived and thrived and most other companies failed, I would say it was these. Number one, we cared more deeply about our company than other management teams did, about all aspects of it, about the satisfaction of our customers, about the coolness of our products, and about each other than other management teams did. And two, we stuck with it longer than other management teams did. As I mentioned, it was another 7 years before the company was acquired. Most other companies just gave up and threw in the towel before that. So in short, I would say it was this combination of passion and perseverance that got us through. Passion is an attitude, perseverance is a behavior, and in many aspects of our lives, our attitudes and behaviors reinforce each other and form a positive feedback loop. As you know, if you just stick with something long enough so you start to get good at it and then start to like it and then start to love it, that's an example of perseverance driving passion. Conversely, if you're already passionate about an activity, the hours can go by like minutes. It's easy to persevere in those circumstances. So you can see how the two form a positive feedback loop. And if you can think of any area of your life where you have experienced that positive feedback, that's probably a really good area to consider starting a company. I like to say that in your areas of passion and perseverance, there are only two things you need to start a company and make it a success: a real unsatisfied customer need and an advantage for satisfying that need relative to others who might try to satisfy it. Now, there are tons of unsatisfied customer needs out there, even just in the areas you're passionate about, and you have tons of advantages, whether or not you realize it. I hope I have a chance to say more about that during the Q&A. But the two are like puzzle pieces, and they have to fit together. So it's largely a process of search to find the two puzzle pieces that fit together the best: customer need and your advantages. That's what you're more likely to be successful. So my book, which I mentioned previously, Unleash Your Inner Company, takes you through a 10-step process, starting with where in your life have you experienced positive feedback between passion and perseverance. And if you haven't experienced that, gives you some exercises so you can. 2, what are unsatisfied customer needs in those areas, all the way through to step number 10, which is scaling up the uniquely differentiated business that you've created. And so sometimes I hear it said, it seems like all the customer needs have already been satisfied. That's ridiculous. Every time a new product or service comes to market, yes, new needs are being satisfied, because otherwise the product or service wouldn't sell. But new needs are also being created. The products that are being introduced can be improved. The companies that are launching them have needs. They have needs for marketing, analytics, inventory control, you name it. And very often new products and services create new needs around them. For example, a new mobile device creates the need for carrying cases, and autonomous vehicles create the need for charging stations, and so forth. So there has never been as good an opportunity, I think, as right now to start a business, because there have never been as many needs that you can address, because there have never been as many products and services on the market as there are today. So those are a few introductory thoughts, Carrie, and I can say more during the Q&A.
Great, thanks, John. We had one comment, said not a question, just a comment. John's storytelling skills are great.
I was thinking the same thing.
I wonder if we could answer this question, John. How do you, and this gets, I think, to more of what you talk about in your book, how do you make a business out of a hobby? Where do you start?
Well, it's perfectly okay to have a hobby that is not a business. And you know, but if you want to have something that's sustainable, and that means being profitable, because if it's not profitable, you're going to have to continue to invest in it indefinitely. You're going to have to persuade others, perhaps, to invest in it, and that's really hard to sustain. So, how do you make a profit? Again, you have to be satisfying a customer need, and you have to have an advantage relative to others who are satisfying that need. Because if you have an advantage, if you don't have an advantage, you won't be able to charge more than what it costs you probably to deliver that product or service. Think about the products and services that you use in the areas that you're passionate about. Let's say you're passionate about running. Well, I am, and think of a product or service that you use as a runner. Well, one of those products is running shoes. Let's use that as an example. Since you're really passionate about running, you probably know about all the limitations of that product or service. Those limitations are potential customer needs. What are the limitations of my running shoes? Well, I can think of three. Number one, they start to smell when I wear them too often. Number two, if I want to change the color of the shoelaces to match my outfit, it's a hassle to thread and rethread those shoelaces every time. Three, the shoes don't tell me how far I've run or how fast I've run. And those are, it would be useful to know that, wouldn't it? So those are all three possible needs. Now I have to go and figure out if they're already being satisfied by other products and services out there. That means doing research, going online, going to shoe stores, talking to other people, making sure that other people have the same needs and not just me. Well, let's say, of course, for some of those needs, there are already at least partial solutions. For example, the Apple Watch or the Fitbit will tell you how far or fast you've run. Or there are shoe sprays and foot pads that address smelly shoes. But even each of these solutions has limitations, doesn't it? Because the sprays and the foot pads, they have to be replaced every day, and the Apple Watch and the Fitbit, I have to remember to put that on and take it off. What if the capability were built into the shoe so I didn't have to wear anything? Or what if I could go for a week or a month without having to replace the spray? So you can see how even the products and services currently available to address a customer need have limitations. And therefore, there are still needs that customers have or potentially have over and above those products and services. So if you start with a single product and service that you're passionate about and go through this thought process, it blossoms into an entire tree of potential customer needs. That's one way to find a potentially infinite number of unsatisfied customer needs in areas that you're passionate about. I could say more about that. The other side of the equation, of course, is inventorying your strengths, your skills, technologies, assets, achievements, relationships, reputation, and inner strengths. That spells the word STARS with 2 A's and 2 R's. And a very worthwhile exercise is to make a big table, use an Excel spreadsheet if you wish, with 7 columns, or do it on paper with 7 columns, and under each of those words, write down as many things as you can think of that you have that you bring to bear. Do this with somebody who knows you well, because they'll think of resources that you have that you've overlooked in yourself. We use this chart again and again to, 1, assess the fit between you and each of those unsatisfied customer needs, 2, to see where the gaps are, 3, to build your self-confidence, because it's putting all the resources that you have out there in one place, and 4, to innovate, because innovation is largely a process of combining needs, that resources that you have in novel ways. So those are some thoughts on how to get started in turning a hobby into a profitable business.
Wonderful. Thanks again, John. We have so many questions. Thank you to all of our viewers who are eagerly sending in some questions. We'll try to get to as many of these as possible in the remaining 30 minutes of our time. But again, a special thank you to our panelists for their insights and suggestions. Let's go back to a question for you, Antonia. You mentioned team, creating your team, building your team, and how that's such an important part of any new business, any startup as an entrepreneur. There was a question about what if you don't have a team? How should you go about building a team? And sort of related to that, is it okay to just be a solopreneur?
I think all of those options are perfectly fine. It really does depend on what you're trying to build. But let me talk a little bit about how my team came together, just because I think that it's pretty unique. My brother and I mentioned, we sat down at our dinner table and we drew out all of these little diagrams, and we said, wouldn't this be so cool? And isn't this something that you would want to hang out with your friends with on? But we realized that we didn't actually know how to build it. We drew it out on napkins and Post-its, but we weren't going to have the tools to realize it, at least not realize it as quickly as it needed to be done. And so what we did is we just got to thinking about, okay, who do we know who might know somebody who could help us? You really just need to assess all of the people that you know. It doesn't matter how large your network is. Chances are you may have a friend who has a friend who's good at something that'll fit one of your needs. And so what we did, we called up a family friend at the end of the day, and he pointed us in the direction of somebody that actually, coincidentally, our father had worked with very tangentially on a project 25 years prior. And we got on the phone with him. We said, here are our drawings. Here, check out what we're thinking of doing. Isn't this great? And he said, well, let me think about it. I'm working on something else right now. 24 hours later, he called us back, told us, I'm going to quit what I'm doing right now because I'm going to come work with you guys. I see what you're doing. I understand how important this is. And I know the guy who can build this platform. So he called up his friend. And the next day, his friend was on our calls, and he's one of our co-founders. He's working with us to this day. He built actually our alpha product in about 10 weeks. And we are actually about to go live on this coming Monday with a public beta. So check out for that. The bottom line is that you can find people who believe in your product, who believe in your vision and your goal in the most random of places. And I mentioned how distributed our team is. That's very strange. And I think that it's kind of unique to this COVID world, but we will not be the last company to be like that. And of course, if you are working on something alone, that's completely fine too. You need to just assess your own skills assess what you bring to the table, and like I said, know what you don't know, and seek the resources that will fill those needs for you. Don't go overboard, but just be very conscious of the needs that you need to fill in order to get your product off the ground.
Great, thanks, Antonia. Alec, this one might be a good one for you, especially where you mentioned one of your first ideas and one of your first investors was your 9th grade homeroom teacher, I think you said. The question is, what is the first step to take if you have a money-making idea, but no materials or money to start it?
That is what I battled for 5 years. It essentially took learning and everything that I did over the course of time to take us till today, where we're hopefully launching this month and having our first paid customer this month, just like Antonia said. You got to make the best out of it. So we live in a world now where knowledge is free. You can find everything online. If you're watching this webinar right now, chances are you can go and seek the knowledge, and curiosity is what's going to take your product or your idea to the next stage. And you can try to figure out either of two paths. Either you're going to build it or you're going to work on it and do all the things yourself. Or you can try to find partners that can help you with it. I was a solo founder, so I was able to kind of make the bridge between the technical knowledge and also the business and social knowledge. Not everybody has that ability. There are plenty of people who are techie people who don't want to do the business side of things or don't understand the business side of things. And then there's quite opposites of that. And I think it works either way, as Antonia said. So we live in a world where a lot of no code is the talk these days, where if you need to build a website or you need to build a prototype, there are plenty of resources out there where you don't need to spend years learning HTML to then learn JavaScript to then learn how to be a software engineer, which would be C++ or something like that. So it's a matter of figuring out the path of least resistance. So I would say take a step back, do a top level view. And if you really aren't the person that can do it, I think you have to go out there and find that person that can help you. And that might be looking toward a community like NextGen. If you're in high school, that might be a peer, or if you go to college, that might be a community you can tap into. It's looking where you can find assistance in places where you might have not have thought about that conventionally.
Here's a question for you, Danielle. I know you talked about encouraging people to reach out and build relationships with mentors. There's a kind of follow-up or related question to that. How do I start a conversation with someone I hope to be my mentor without being pushy?
That's a great question. I think building any relationship is something that you do slowly and over time. And so I would recommend to reach out to the person that you want to talk to with a pretty specific ask. Something like, I'd love to talk to you for 30 minutes about X, Y, or Z. And it's really great when you get an email from somebody or you hear from someone who's kind of done their homework and they've researched what you do and why you're the right person for them to talk to. And so I would add that in there as well. I'd like to take 30 minutes to talk about these topics. And I've really liked, these podcasts you've done, or I've liked, the work you did in these areas. I think that helps a lot. I wouldn't necessarily start off with saying, hey, I'm looking for a mentor. Can you be my mentor? That's a much bigger ask and a much bigger commitment. I find that mentorship is best done over time and slowly, where eventually someone sort of becomes a mentor to you. It's not that you said, I'm going to stick this label on this person and they're going to be my mentor, but hey, this is a person who is taking time with me. They're happy to do follow-up calls and meetings. Maybe they're even reaching out to you and saying, hey, how are you doing? I was just thinking about you the other day. And so it's something that you build up to. And I don't even think it necessarily even needs to be formalized I think if you're, maybe talking about the person, you might say, oh yeah, this person is a mentor to me or an advisor to me. But between you and that other person, I don't even know that it has to always be explicit. And one thing I want to say is actually about the differences between a mentor and an advisor, because I make a bit of a distinction there. And I believe that a mentor is someone who really believes in you and your leadership potential, and is thinking about how you're going to grow into the future. Whereas an advisor might be someone who really wants to kind of get, just like really dig in on technical chops, and they're going to help you to solve a specific problem you have. But they might not be there for sort of the longer haul. So I kind of think of these two, advisor and mentor, as different. But that would be my advice, is to start with a small, easy to say yes to ask. Show that you've done your homework about reading about things. The worst is when someone reaches out to you and the thing that they want, you've already written a bunch of posts on, or maybe you've written a whole book on it, but the person hasn't read your book or something like that. So do the background work and reach out with, a small doable ask.
Wonderful. Thanks, Danielle. John, we have a lot of questions for you, wanting you to elaborate a little bit more on, as Nate says, piecing together passion and opportunity that you said you wanted to talk more about. Francisco had a related question about that. He says he's a fiction writer who wants to create a business based around that. Again, how do you find and connect those passions with those opportunities?
May I first respond to this good question that has come up, is what's the best way to connect with a potential mentor or investor? And one really good way, I think, is to watch their YouTube videos, read their bio, learn as much as you can about them, and see what they're interested in. And then figure out a way that you can be useful to them, no matter how small. Let's say that your research indicates that an investor has, say, invested in digital signal processing and is interested in basketball. Maybe plays it, maybe he or she is interested in it, whatever. Okay, great. That gives you a lot to work with. Go online, do a search. Can you find an article from, the Wall Street Journal or The Economist or Technology Review about digital signal processing? Has it perhaps been applied to basketball? If so, that article might well be of real interest to that investor or mentor. And then just send it and say, dear so-and-so, in reading your bio, I saw that you're interested in these subjects. I came across this article. I thought it might be of interest. Maybe say a word or two about yourself, but just leave it there. Then perhaps a little time go by and do it again. Maybe they'll respond, maybe they won't. Even if they don't respond, do it again. And then let them start to get to know you by virtue of your trying to be of service without asking for anything in return. And at some point, probably they'll respond and just say, hey, thanks, that was useful. And then that opens up the range of possibilities of other conversations you can have with them. So that's one thought on reaching out to investors and mentors. We have many more advantages to start a company and make it a success than we tend to realize. I mentioned the STARS chart. That's skills, technologies, assets, achievements, relationships, reputation, and strengths, as in inner strengths. And again, it's whether you plan to start a new venture or not, something that's extremely worthwhile in life, regardless of where you are, is to inventory all of your resources by drawing this chart and use it to as a resource to figure out, to help you figure out what's the right path for you. And let me say a word about the inner strengths, things like, perhaps integrity, creativity, ingenuity, perseverance, compassion, passion, and so forth. All of these are things that would go in the inner strengths column of your chart. Here's a strength, an inner strength that we often overlook. If there's some aspect of yourself that you genuinely cannot change, find a way to view it as an asset, and it will become one of your assets. I use myself as an example. When I was in my mid-30s, I accepted the fact that I'm gay. Most people wouldn't view that as an asset. I disagree. For me, it's been an asset in at least 5 different ways. Number one, it wasn't socially acceptable to be growing openly gay when I was growing up, and so at least some of the energy I might have put into dating, I put into sports and studying and career instead. Today, 30 years later, I'm hugely enjoying the benefit of that early investment. 2, when you're growing up gay, you know unambiguously, with absolute certainty, that at least some of the world's routine assumptions are wrong. People routinely assume that guys are attracted to gals and vice versa, don't they? But you know it's not universally correct. And so that's helped me not necessarily accept the status quo and think outside the box, and that's made me a better entrepreneur, manager, and investor. 3, I'm not a minority in any sense that I can think of other than being gay, and so it's sensitized me to some of the challenges that minorities face. 4, when people see that I'm not trying to hide my sexual orientation, they can see I'm being honest with them, and that helps build trust between us. And 5, I think it further conveys that I have strength in reserve if I can be open about the fact that I'm gay. Similarly, if there's some aspect of yourself that you genuinely cannot change, find a way to view it as an asset. Set the bar very high. Don't use this as an excuse to accept some aspect of yourself that you can change and would like to change. But if you genuinely cannot change it, if you can find a way to view it as an asset, it'll be hugely empowering for you as it was for me, and that aspect of yourself will become one of your strengths. A few years ago, I was giving this exact same talk to an auditorium of undergraduates in Guatemala. And as I spoke, about halfway back in the auditorium, a young man gently made a fist and pressed it up against his chest, like this. And at first, I thought it was some small gesture of agreement or support for what I was saying. But then, when I looked again, I could see he wasn't making a fist at all. His hand had no fingers on it. And imagine he was saying, this I cannot change. This is my strength. So similarly, if there is some aspect of yourself that you genuinely cannot change, find a way to view it as an asset, and it will become one of your assets.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing, John. I think we have time, hopefully, for a couple of more questions before we have to wrap up. This one I'll put out to everyone and see who might want to answer this. This is from Autumn. What are some ways to tie entrepreneurship to charity?
Well, I have some thoughts. The most important thing you can do if you're thinking of starting a nonprofit or a charity is to make it sustainable. And the best way to make it sustainable is to make it profitable. There are 2 advantages of that. One is, if it's profitable, then you don't have to spend all your time raising money, and you can spend more time helping the people that you want to help. And 2, if you can make the people you're helping self-sufficient, so that the period of time that you have to help them is of limited duration, that lets you spread your limited resources over more people and help more people. So both try to make the people you're helping self-sufficient and make your organization self-sufficient or self-sustaining. It's okay, even if you're running a nonprofit, to have revenue sources. And so as long as they relate to the nonprofit. So keep those things in mind as ways of linking charity with entrepreneurship.
Okay. Anyone else have thoughts to add? Yeah.
Yeah, I can jump in really quickly and just say that what I've learned over the years is that there's a mentality that is necessary for entrepreneurship, so building a company or social activism or building a nonprofit or a charity. And like I said earlier, when I built Stanford Votes at school, those same skills translated really well into what I do at Toucan every day as a CEO. And so what I can't stress enough is you really need to understand the importance of, like I said, teamwork and organizational skills, and finding your passion, following your passion, and being creative about your ideas, because that will take you really far in building whatever organization or initiative you'd like to pursue.
Thank you. Danielle, this one might be a good one for you to answer. This comes from Jaron. Do you think that online marketplaces are better than brick and mortars in this day and age?
Oh gosh, that's very interesting. Well, overall, what comes to mind to start is that they sound like two very different businesses on the surface. When I think about an online marketplace, you're often thinking about scale and how do we get out to a wider market. And then I start thinking about things like, well, how do you do shipping? And, we have a company that they're called Hamama, and they sell a microgreen. So it's not like a generalized marketplace, but it is a direct to consumer market for basically turning your kitchen into a garden. And it's really interesting to work with them and figure out all these solutions that they have to do to be able to service their customers who are across the US, and eventually they want to expand globally. If I think about more of a brick and mortar type business, I'm thinking more local. I'm thinking about what do people in the community need. I'm thinking about things like what is sort of the COVID protocol in the area and how does that affect things. So I generally think of them as two very different types of businesses, depending on where a person wants to go with them. I am seeing a lot of people start, small businesses, small local businesses right now, especially in major cities where rents are coming down because certain businesses have closed, and people are saying, hey, we want to bring in, new business here. So we're going to, the rent is cut right now. So I'm seeing some interesting, I don't know how it's going to go yet. But we will see.
I'd like to add something to that if I can.
Cool.
There's a lot of talk about the businesses, and I think Antonia and I and with Danielle, we've spoke about a lot of like venture scalable businesses and businesses that require investors. That's not the only type of business that is that looks good and makes you feel good and gives you happiness and allows you to find your passion. And so I wanted to just shine a light really quickly that there are other types of businesses. Not a lot of people want to strive to be on the cover of TechCrunch and want to go through the emotional stages like John had outlined. And so if you're somebody who doesn't want to, run a technology company and pitch investors, that's totally acceptable. And there's totally a place for it in today's world, especially, even in the COVID pandemic climate. Some of the biggest businesses were founded during the pandemic, businesses like Uber, Airbnb, Microsoft, Electronic Arts, Venmo, Warby Parker, all businesses started when times were tough, because I think that testifies to who you are as a person. And so regardless of the type of business, if it's something you want to go out there and do, go get it.
Wonderful.
Carrie, may I reinforce what Alex has said? I really agree with Alex's point that a pandemic is a good time, if not a great time, to start your new venture for two reasons, multiple reasons. Number one, we don't have as many distractions and ways of using our time during pandemics as we normally do. We can't go to the theater, movies. In many cases, can't go out to eat in restaurants and so forth. You're stuck at home. Great. It's a perfect opportunity to reach out to prospective customers, really understand what their needs are, understand the possible technologies and explore and research the possible technologies that might be applied to address those needs, test the fit between the customer need and the possible technology and solution that you're offering. So we have much more bandwidth to do those activities during a pandemic than we do normally. Second, there are a whole bunch of new customer needs during a pandemic, aren't there? Think about it. People need to get food delivered to their home, products and services. They need to work out and get exercise, even though their gym is closed. I could go on and on. You know all the ways that your life has changed during the pandemic. The people who jump on those who recognize and jump on those unsatisfied customer needs sooner have a great advantage, a time to market advantage. You might just be the first person to recognize an unsatisfied customer need in your neighborhood in an area that you're passionate about. One of the challenging things, of course, we have to do is figure out which needs are likely to reflect a change in the way that people will live and work indefinitely, or which ones are relatively short-lived, because you're going to have to make an investment here of at least your time and maybe money to address that customer need. And so you're going to have to do the complex calculation of trying to figure out how long that need is going to last. But if you can be first to jump on an unsatisfied customer need and address it as I've described, it's a great time to start a business. I might add one more thing, and that is a really important lesson is this: live frugally and save something for a rainy day. Right now, it's raining. With the COVID pandemics, lockdowns, and so forth, this is a rainy day. Those people who lived and worked frugally up until now, who have resources to spare, not only get through the pandemic and the hard times more easily, but they can pick up assets more cheaply because so many assets are available at discounted prices right now. You might even be able to acquire one of your competitors during a difficult time like this. If you have lived frugally and saved, set something aside for a rainy day. So if you're not already running your life and your business in such a way as to save something every quarter for a downturn like this, now is the time to start.
I think what we're all touching on is know your reason why you're doing what you're doing. Why does it get you up out of bed in the morning? Does it matter if it's raining or if it's shining outside? Understanding your why will let you know how far you're going to go.
Great. We have about 5 minutes left. Might have time for another question here, I think related to this discussion about starting a business during the pandemic and how, as John said, it could be a really great time to start a business. Certainly, Alec and Antonia, you've had success with that. Heidi asks, how do you build your skills and what are the most valuable skills to learn? So I think, Alec, you mentioned coding. Danielle, you mentioned debate and public speaking as being some good ways to build skills. What would be some other skills that you would recommend? And particularly during the pandemic, how could young entrepreneurs go about building these skills?
Is this open to everyone?
To everyone, yes, please.
So there's two types of skills. So I don't preach that you need to be a coder. Even my coding skills only get me so far. So there's skills like self-awareness and being able to see curiosity, like those will get you far in life. Those are the ones, being able to figure things out, when being inclined to just Google something when you need the answer than trying to sit there and ponder it. Those are the skills that will get you regardless of whether you're a salesman or whether you're a CEO. And then there's technical skills that you can actually pinpoint. Like you may want to be a salesperson. You may want to learn how to negotiate and how to sell yourself as a human, because that will help you get a job or even start a company.
Anyone else?
I can also add on to that. I can add on briefly, just to Alec's point about sales. It doesn't necessarily need to be about selling yourself, but one skill that's really important for anybody who wants to start any sort of organization or company is understanding people and being really approachable and being nice. And that really comes down to a couple of things. Like one really big thing that has helped me build this company, and also just like Stanford Votes and all sorts of other projects that I've endeavored on, is remembering people's names. and making them feel like you care. I mean, you should care about them, but conveying to them that you actually care about who they are and what their story is and what they're looking for. And so really being able to speak with somebody and listen to them and have them know that you're listening to them is a really, really, really important life skill, not just for entrepreneurship, but for everything going forward. And I can't stress that enough.
Any final comments?
I was just going to add that. Oh, sorry, John. For me, it's all relative to what the person wants to what they want to do. Everybody's going to have a different skill set that they want to develop based on where they want to go with their passion or a project or a startup that they have. And to me, it's really all about figuring out what the next step is to being able to do that. And I do think that sometimes people, one thing I've noticed working with younger entrepreneurs is that oftentimes people want to learn things when the house is a tiny bit on fire and not beforehand. I can remember times where we would have workshops and things like that when I was at the Teal Fellowship, or we'd have a negotiations workshop and someone would say, oh, well, I'm not going to come to that because it's not relevant to me right now. But my opinion is that you're negotiating all the time, whether it's with friends or with family or in business. And so you might think about both. What are the things where, the house might catch a tiny bit on fire that you're going to need to know about and what you're going to do. But I think another way to learn about things is to think about the feedback that you're getting from other people. To Antonia's point about core skills like listening and learning people's names and things like that. Notice what is reflected to you from other people as well. Or you might go around to friends and ask them like, hey, what skills do you think I'm really good at, or which ones should I develop? Because they might have a different perspective than you would have for yourself.
Great insights. We are now at our time. We could go on and on with these questions and wonderful answers. Thank you. I really want to give a heartfelt thank you to our fantastic panelists for all of your time and insights and inspiration today. Really appreciate you being here. Hope that you will join us for a future FEE event. Antonia and Alec, best wishes to you on your endeavors.
Thank you so much.
And much gratitude to our audience for joining us and being so engaged with all of your questions. We have one more event tomorrow night getting started in both English and Spanish, so please head over to fee.org to check that out and register if you haven't already. Please follow FEE on YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. You can find me at fee.org/Kerry and sign up for my weekly email newsletter. We'll be giving away hopefully some of John's copies of some of John's books. He's gratefully volunteered to provide some copies of his books to the FEE audience, and so we'll be offering some giveaways there. Finally, we'd really value your feedback, so if you can provide some post-program feedback on the form that we sent you through chat, that would be great. Thanks again to all of our panelists and attendees for such a wonderful event, and best wishes to everyone.